Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue talking about more topics around the NFL draft. And in that, there's always trade talks, projections on players, where they're going to land, where teams are going to decide if they're going to trade up, how the draft board falls, a lot of things surrounding the draft, especially now that we're almost exactly 2 weeks away. On Thursday, it'll be 2 weeks away. But we're getting closer and closer to the big day, April 25th, to the start of that first round. I'm anticipating it a lot because, it's just exciting seeing where everybody lands. And there's always something crazy that seems to happen on the first day of the draft. And among that is the trades that I mentioned. NFL analyst Chad Forbes posted on his Twitter account that the worst kept secret of the draft in the NFL is that the Green Bay Packers, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Washington Commanders are all discussing trade up options proposals for the number 16th pick, right now owned by the Seattle Seahawks. And looking at all those teams, the Eagles are picking 22. The Commanders right now don't have another first round pick other than the number 2 pick. And the Packers have the 25th overall pick in the first round. So you take all that into account. Starting with the Commanders, Forbes actually went a little bit deeper with the Commanders and said that according to his sources close to the Commanders, that they really liked, and I think the specific word that he used was that the Commanders were enamored with J.C. Latham and offensive tackle from Penn State, Olu Fashanu. Those two are very high up on their boards according to the sources of Chad Forbes. Right now, the Commanders sit at number 2, like I mentioned. It all but seems that it's going to be Jaden Daniels or any quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, Drake May, whoever they feel is the second best quarterback in this draft, with Caleb Williams going first overall. So then you look at what they have to offer, the Commanders. Right now, they're sitting in a spot where they have the number 36th overall pick and the 40th overall pick that they got from Chicago in the Montez Sweat trade that sent him over there at the trade deadline to get that 40th overall pick. Packaging both of those makes sense. For the 16th pick, I don't think that's too high of an asking price or of a bid for the Seahawks pick. The Commanders, I've been already a fan of their offseason, how they've rebuilt it, how they've accepted the identity of Dan Quinn. They've brought in some former Cowboys. They've addressed a lot, brought in Austin Eckler. And right now, they address the offensive line with Nick Allegretti, Tyler Biadasz. The defensive line still needs work, in my opinion. I mean, they brought in Bobby Wagner on the defensive side of the ball as well. So they've addressed really all over. Older players, you still have to see what they can give you. But it's certainly better from an experience standpoint and from where they were really just last season with a lot of moving parts. It all seems a bit more tame right now. From that aspect, you have older players, you just know what to expect, how to handle these issues on the Commanders. It's going to help Dan Quinn a lot, but offensive line is still a big thing, especially with a rookie quarterback projected to come in. I don't have to tell you guys that. With Jaden Daniels coming in, if he were to be the pick, it's important to protect him. You saw all the shots that he took in LSU. You're not going to be able to protect him from all those, obviously, just because he's a running quarterback. A lot of those hits come when he's running down the field and he's hit by a safety, a defensive back, and just tackled as a ball runner. So the quarterback safety rules don't really apply when he's just putting himself out there. But if you can protect him just in the pocket with better protection from some of the best offensive tackles, you can see why the Commanders are really accepting this aggressive mindset set in by their new general manager, Adam Peters. Dan Quinn, I'm sure, is a fan of it and his style going out there and getting the players that he needs to be successful. It's all positive, but looking at the Seahawks, where they stand, number 16, they also, from their part, need a lot of things to really make this team a competitive team because of the division that they're in. The NFC is pretty wide open right now with the teams that made it and the records that they had. The Seahawks were right in that battle up until the last couple weeks of last year, so I'm sure they feel like they're right there in terms of just getting in the playoffs or at least competing with some of these teams that were on the brink of making it or not. They have some solid players. Jackson Smith and Jigba was very impressive. They still have DK Metcalf there to provide them something. Kenneth Walker was also there running the ball. Very solid, underrated running back, in my opinion. The biggest thing for them is the offensive line, as well as pass rusher, but I think offensive line just touts it a little bit. They desperately need offensive linemen, and they sit in that spot where the run of offensive linemen could start as early as 12, and unfortunately for them, they could just be the odd man out, just missing it right at the cutoff at 15. So they have to measure out their options with that. The Commanders don't have a first-round pick to offer, so that's something else that they have to consider with the sort of talent that they want to bring in to their team. Then you look at someone like the Packers as well. They also have some picks to give up. Unlike the Commanders, they have a first overall pick. Now, switching picks just straight up like that, if I'm the Commanders, I'm not sure if I'm taking it just because you hold the leverage right now. You're the one with the pick that everybody seems to want, so you don't have to give it up. I'm asking for at least a third. If you can get a second, that's ideal. You don't really get much better than that. With the Packers, at least getting their 25th overall pick, if you were to ask for that. And on top, they have the 41st overall pick in the second round that they got from the New York Jets in the Aaron Rodgers trade, and the number 58 pick as well. So if you can't get the 41 and still want a first-round pick, I'm probably asking for the 25 and the 58 to address some of the needs that the Seahawks still need. The Packers are in a similar spot with the Seahawks because, again, they were the last team to make the playoffs, and they really surprised a lot of people. Jordan Love played amazing. The young wide receivers that they had, outstanding in some of their performances. Yeah, Aaron Jones isn't there, and he had a great postseason, but Josh Jacobs, I'm sure, could at least give you what Aaron Jones did, maybe a little bit less if you want to be on the safer side. But regardless of that, I think their defense surprised a lot of people, played up to the level of competition, and they only really need, after addressing the safety position a little bit, they need another defensive back on the other side of Jair, maybe a safety that they could pair up with Xavier McKinney. But other than Tyler Nubin out of Minnesota, that's the only safety I could argue could be in the first round. Other than that, they could address that later on. Offensive line is always something that everybody seems to need, can't get enough of. After John Runyon left and a few others, they could address that, which is why I think they want to move up. Other than offensive line, I don't see why they would, but that's the report. That's what's coming out of Chad Forbes and other people that follow the Packers. So it makes sense. But again, I just question the idea about moving up to 16 because I truly believe that the tackles like Fashanu and I'm forgetting his name, J.C. Latham, you have guys like Tyler Guyton who could be in that later half of the first round as offensive tackles, but some of these teams are just enamored with the player that they want and doing everything that they can to get him, which makes sense, but really offensive line, if you're not getting some of the top ones like Joe Alt and some other ones that are projected to start at 12 and then just really go up to 15, 16 if you're lucky, you get one of them to fall there, it could be worth it, but I think that's too big a risk to do that and move up and potentially give up multiple picks just to maybe miss out on the guys that you really need. And then rounding it out with the Philadelphia Eagles, another team that has the 22nd overall pick, so they're right there close with the Seahawks. They have the 50th overall pick from the Saints and 53. That's their own pick in the second round. O-line, again, is another issue for them, and defensive back. I don't need to tell many people that follow football or follow the Eagles, if you're a fan, James Bradbury didn't play particularly well. Was on the receiving end of a lot of criticism just because of the level that he played in his first year. Then to have that big a drop-off was alarming, and very unfortunate for some of the fans that were very angry with some of the performances that he put out there. He got benched in the Tampa Bay game. That was their last game of the year in the playoffs. So it left a lot of bad taste in people's mouths. It's something that I probably see as their biggest need. Offensive line, not so much because they just locked down Landon Dickerson. They locked down Jordan Mailata. Lane Johnson is still under contract until 2026. They have Cam Jurgens there. I know I'm probably 95% sure they're going to give him at least a shot at center or right guard where he played last year under Kelsey's last year. So you only need one more spot, and I don't think it's a massive, massive need for them to draft one of the top guys with so many other great pieces around them. Yeah, you want to have the best guys at each position. I acknowledge that. But you have analysts like Mel Kiper, Field Yates, saying that some of the top centers like Zach Frazier and Jackson Powers Johnson have started to slide back a little bit in some draft boards. The only one that still remains a top pick, first rounder, is Graham Barton, the center from Duke. And if you want to make a case to move up to 16 just to make sure you get him, all right, that's how you feel. That's how you want to make sure you get him. But at the same time, he still could be there at 22. So I don't think, again, it's worth the risk of moving up to try and get a guy like Graham Barton and giving up potentially multiple picks that you, at the end of the day, didn't have to give up because not many people outside of the Eagles, the Steelers maybe need a center, and the Steelers are picking 20. I'm almost sure they're not going to take a center with the 20th overall pick as well. So the Eagles really, again, don't have much incentive to desperately move up because of the state of their offensive line already. And just based on the fact, going back to the biggest factor, is that the Seahawks, I just think addressing that spot is their biggest need. And if O-line is the biggest need, talking about trading with the 16th overall pick, I would think the Seahawks would want to move up and use that pick to move further up themselves rather than giving it up to somebody else just to make them stronger and maybe not address it to the best of their ability with a pick in the later rounds in that first round. But, that's just me. That's how I feel about it. That's the rumors swirling around. The Packers, the Eagles, and the Commanders are the teams that are lurking, stalking that 16th overall pick right now. It makes sense for some picks, but again, all these teams are pretty well built up right now through free agency or just on the talent that they had in their own rosters. I don't think it's worth the risk right now. Yeah, it's enticing to trade up, get the guy you want, and it's exciting for anybody to do that and feel very confident in the moment, I'm sure, when you make a pick like that or decision like that and make the pick of that player. But at the end of the day, you have to measure out all your options, and it's always smarter, at least in my opinion. Probably the biggest theme of the show so far around the draft is that trading back is the safest and probably works out the best in most cases for these teams that need a rebuild, that need multiple positions. Going quality over quantity isn't always the best situation in my opinion, but that's where that stands. The Seahawks have a lot of options to ponder over. Same with the Packers that want to compete. Same with the Seahawks with a new head coach trying to get in the playoffs. And the Eagles as well, trying to make that run after last year being very disappointing for them and their fan bases. All those questions will be answered at the draft. All we can do right now is speculate, but that's also very fun to do in the weeks leading up to the draft. But moving on with the show and topics, we're going to go into another break. And on the other side, we're going to get into the Seahawks, the Titans, the Panthers, and the New England Patriots starting their offseason programs today, and some topics, questions that still remain with those teams after free agency has cooled down and getting closer and closer to the draft. So you'll want to know more about those teams and those topics after the break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.